Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone all over the world. So today we're going to be talking about Allah, and a lot about Allah, and a lot about the pagan origins and practices in Islam. And I'm proud and happy to be joined with Mary Harb today. How you doing, Mary?
I am doing well. I'm very excited to be sharing this. Lots of fun information.
You want to give an overview of the presentation, or you just want to jump into it?
Well, I think an introduction would be in order. So basically, I'm presenting the information we have on the pagan origins of Allah versus, some things that you may have heard from other folks who are just kind of tossing around things, like, is he a moon god? Is he from the north? Is he from the south? Is he from both? Like, what's going on here? What do we actually have real evidence for versus what were ideas that, sometimes scholars kicked around for a while and then went, well, nope, that's not right. And then other times people just kind of made up. But I actually want to pull up the stream so that I can track the chat, and then I can start my slideshow, and folks can ask questions in the chat, and you can bring them up as you wish
Yeah,
as we go along.
yeah. So this is a topic that's near dear to my heart as well because I've researched this off and on for a year and a half now. And I've gotten so many different answers every time I've researched it. So I'm curious to see what all you're going to be talking about. It's gonna be exciting. And we have some people excited in the chat too. But you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Some familiar faces, but some of you guys
Yes.
were not listeners back when I presented a good portion of this information. Not all of it, but a good portion previously. So before we start out, I do want to point out that there are kind of three different meccas that you might talk about. One of them is the purely imaginary Mecca of modern popular Islam. And whenever we talk about the historical Mecca, we are not talking about that place. We are also not talking about the legendary primordial Mecca of the Islamic sources that are trying to tie it to all of these ancient figures that it really has nothing to do with. What we are talking about is a real historical city that was founded probably in the 5th century AD for the first time as a settled place on the site of a pre-existing pagan shrine that had not had any permanent settlement, but itself was not all that old, but was very much like many other pagan shrines. So when we talk about this Mecca and this Kaaba, we're not saying, the Muslims are right. Adam and Eve were there. Abraham and Ishmael were there. 300 prophets are buried there. No, that just saying that Mecca was a real place is not endorsing a full, all of Muhammad's fairy tales that he liked to tell. So
Yeah.
it's important to start out with that because there's a certain level of confusion that arises whenever you start talking about historical Mecca, historical Allah, who these people were, where they were, what's going on. Well, in Allah's case, where this idol was, right? There are three things that you often hear that aren't true that I want to debunk before we start. There was some debate over whether or not Allah was actually Al-Ilah or Al-Allah in terms of a condensed form of one of these two. And the reason why that there was a question is because it's well known that the name Alat, the feminine form, was very
Mhm.
well attested.
Yeah.
And is very well known. Nabatea had Alat as their high god or high goddess, and they actually combined Alat with Al-Uzza in Nabatea. That's a unique thing to Nabatea. Nobody else confused them. But in Nabatea, they did. But they kind of, because they called her Alat, but the proper form of the later Arabic feminine ending, it became standardized so that it should have been Allah had, excuse me, it should be ilahat instead of ilat as the just generic word for goddess. And so people were like, well, maybe this doesn't mean goddess. Maybe it means something else. But we now have confirmation that, in fact, from various inscriptions, various other sources, that Alat is a condensed version of the goddess. It really does mean the goddess, which means that Allah, which was coined, Allah was coined as a title, as a kind of answer to Alat. Alat came first. It's older. Allah was kind of like, well, you talk about the goddess, but let's talk about the God. He's more important. He's the God. He's the most important God. But this was referring to a specific pagan deity. In the Northern Arabian inscriptions, you're not really able to find out necessarily a name behind that, because the inscriptions, he's not terribly popular there. But in some cases, you can tell who he isn't, because if he appears in an inscription next to another god, obviously he's not the same god. But an important point of Allah being the rival of Alat is that do you know what Allahu Akbar means? Anybody in the chat, if you guys know what Allahu Akbar literally means?
The God is a mouse.
Well, there we go. Allah is a mouse. But it is not the superlative form. It is not Allah is the greatest. It is Allah is greater. It's comparative. Right. Who's he greater than? Take a guess.
Allah.
Because guess what they used to say about Allah or Alat? They used to say Alat the Great. This is recorded by Herodotus. It's recorded in pre-Islamic poetry and traditions from the pre-Islamic era, that the people who really devoted themselves to Alat would go, Alat the Great, great Alat, Alat the Great. So whenever people were like, no, the most important God is a male God, they would say Allah is greater than Alat. That's every time a Muslim says Allahu Akbar rather than Al-Kabir, what they're really saying is that Allah is more important than Alat is. They just don't remember it anymore. So, another quick debunking. Allah is not the Egyptian god, and some people, a lot of times they say La, but that's not how it's spelled. It is a capital I. In certain fonts, a capital I looks like a capital L, or excuse me, it looks like a lowercase l, and so people got confused and thought that this Ya God was somehow the same letters as La, and it's not. This is just a confusion of fonts. This is not something that any serious scholar ever claimed, but you'll hear it running around sometimes because it was written in a famous polemical book against Islam, but it's just not true. Another one is that Allah and Makkah have nothing to do with Al-Makkah. So Al-Makkah is the god of the Sabaeans, and that's his name. The Al and Allah is a determinative. It's the word the. But the Al and Al-Makkah is just part of the word. It's part of the name. It's not a the. Right. It's not the Mecca. It's not anything like that. The K is not a Ka is not Ka. Ka and Ka are completely different letters, not the same. So those three things we should be careful not to repeat because they aren't true, and there's no basis for claiming them. So Mecca early on was itself a backwater, but it was a backwater between two large divisions. And just ignore like the actual words on the map. Just look at the yellow and then the red, because the yellow and red are meaningful. A lot of the other stuff is made up. I couldn't find a good map showing the Adnan Khatan divide outside of this one. And I wasn't going to make one. So that red there is a division of the Arabs that had reached the south. They're not the same as the South Arabians. So they're not the Sabaeans. They're not the Himyarites that you may have heard of. They are Bedouin Arabs who had arrived pretty early on, or at least they are northwestern or North Arabian speakers. So very, very, very close to Arabic, if not truly Arabic. And that's who, like, they're probably, I believe that there are actually dialects that are called Arabic today. They're descended from this group. So these folks were the main Bedouins down in Yemen. Then up north towards Syria are the Adnanites. And that's where Muhammad's immediate family is from. They're from Adnan. Anything farther back than Adnan, anything farther back than that is legend as far as Arabs are concerned. This is the only history that they have. Anything farther back they can't actually remember, and they're just borrowing from Jews and other people and trying to apply it to themselves. So the other regions are not as densely populated with Arabs. There are Arabs, and a good chunk of the central region who are Bedouins. The Hijaz was occupied. There were villages there. There were tribes there. There were herders there. It's just the empty quarter. And then there's one other little desert to the north that really doesn't grow anything. They didn't have anybody. But they were very poor and unimportant. And so they were heavily influenced by the much more important groups to the north or to the south. And the southern Arabs were very heavily influenced by the South Arabian countries like Saba or Sheba and Himyar that they lived among. And so that's important because Mecca as a site emerged under a Khatanite group, but then was conquered by an Adnanite group who didn't really have a full memory of its origins because they stole it from somebody else. This is a more accurate map of, and this is not fully the correct date for this, but it's close enough. It's close enough that it's good enough. It just doesn't have, there are a few issues with it, but this kind of gives you a basic look of how the tribes were arranged and the kingdoms were arranged during this late antiquity period.
I'm surprised Himyar is so small.
Which one? Oh, well, this is an earlier one. Again, this is supposed to be 366, but some of the tribes to the north are not in the right places for 366 necessarily. So it's a little bit, it's not perfect. It kind of mushes together the 7th century with the 4th century kind of in one. Himyar spread farther, eventually farther to the east, and took over all of Hadramaut. Their actual their goal was actually to take over Hadramaut because they wanted to get a monopoly on the trade of the frankincense and control as many ports as possible. And they were sea traders. They were sea oriented. But earlier on, it began with the land routes. But by the time of the 7th century, the old incense land routes just weren't all that important. They were important to the locals. If you lived there, it's really important, whatever your local road is. But you were trading out from your local area with the products that you had. You weren't trading from one distant place to another distant place. You were bringing stuff in and taking stuff out from your local area rather than, taking incense all the way from Oman all the way up to Petra. You weren't doing that anymore because it was so much cheaper to go by sea. So
I've heard one theory about that with would anyone have been trying to trade through the land routes to avoid taxation or pirates from Egypt or from Persia trying to get to Petra from like India?
Well, at this time, the Red Sea was pretty much entirely controlled by Rome. And if you were trading up to Rome, you're paying their taxes anyway.
Right. Doesn't
Hemiar
matter.
actually emerged and became powerful because they were like, okay, this whole situation, Sheba and the minions together pretty much have a lockdown on the land trade. Let's see what we can do about the sea trade. They were terrible sailors at first. They really were. They never got very good. But then they began taking in first the Egyptian, and then very shortly after that, the Romano-Egyptian and truly Roman sailors in that area. And from early times, it was really, even before that many conquests happened, it was really the ports that Hemyar wanted to control to trade with other people. They were not transporting the stuff themselves, but they were
Right.
trying to like monopolize the supply. So you have to trade with me. You have to come to my port. You don't have any other choice. So whenever you hear about folks visiting there and setting up churches, they were setting up churches in the port towns for the Romans pretty much during the time of Hemyar. And there's a lot more political stuff that we are not going to get into there. But so this entire region from way up north to the Aramaean Hittite states, all the way down to Yemen, had certain similarities in worship. And the big thing they all had in common is that they generally, not exclusively, they were influenced by people farther to the east who always had carved idols, but they generally preferred their gods to be aniconic, meaning that they are not carved into figures. They were generally beetles, which are just natural rocks. So they prefer the natural rocks. So if you saw a really, really cool looking rock that kind of looks like maybe it doesn't belong here, well, that's a way to access the gods. And if you get your brain into like the thought process of a pagan, it makes sense because gods were mostly considered to be local, and you wanted to localize the presence of the god to something to be able to worship him better. And what is more appropriate than part of the actual earth itself that the god rules is highly appropriate.
A little
So,
off of a tangent, but I have some pretty rocks myself
well,
that
there we
I
go.
got from a mountain system,
Well,
so from a cave system.
clearly, if
Pretty
you're a
rocks
pagan,
attract people, yeah.
you should be worshiping that because
I
it's a
should be
pretty rock.
worshiping them.
So
Yeah.
there we go.
It's pretty on the outside too. It has like the little orange or gold flakes on it. Emerald geode. Nice. Anyway. Sorry, I just think about the pretty rocks and like pretty rock, me worship type mentality. Love it. Anyway.
So anyway, and I am sorry if anyone feels like they have a devotion to people who are teaching things that are not defensible and are extraordinarily wrong, but I am not going to teach false things just because some people really like teaching them. So again, we're being precise, we're being careful, and we're saying things that can be reasonably defended. So yes, again, it is truly lithophilia. They love their rocks hugely. So not going to read it because it is too much, but over and over again in the Bible, you have all these times when the Israelites are either commanded to destroy or are destroying the pillars or standing stones or some similar term that's used. And this term is the term that is used for a stone which is set upright to mark something, but very often is a betel for worship. So they're doing all the smashing of stones. God says to Moses, when you guys go into the land, go smash those stones. This was the normative Bronze Age kind of worship, and it continued through the Iron Age. A lot of it survived Hellenism, even though, the Hellenistic society very often emphasized um, it was very dominant and impressed lots of people, and people adopted parts of it. And so in Nabatea, you'd get these like little eyes carved onto otherwise very simple blocks, and a tiny lips to kind of be halfway in between the the carved figures. Of course, the Greeks always wanted, and the people farther to the east preferred, like truly carved images of their gods, versus the aniconic stones that were kind of the native way that people worshipped their false gods. So again, very old, many commands to do it. You would have the Asherah poles, and Asherah is our buddy a lot, is Asherah, except for in Nabatea, where she gets confused with Ishtar, and then they both become Ishtar, probably under the influence of Hellenism, because Aphrodite is actually Ishtar borrowed into the Greek pantheon, as we will see in a moment. Aphrodite is not a native Greek goddess. And practices for the region between the Syria region down toward the south, down toward Yemen, throughout the Hijaz. Not certain that it's in Yemen, because the archaeological work has not been done to establish open air sanctuaries there. Yes, indeed, Ishtar and feathered. So the archaeological work hasn't been in yet, so you can't say with confidence. They did have, it is normative among archaeologists to believe that the old South Arabian gods were also aniconic, but the form of their temple sites, I don't think has really been discovered yet. Again, archaeological work just hasn't been done yet. But in Syria, at least, and in all of the Arabian stories through the Hijaz, you have stories of and descriptions of a certain type of sanctuary that will sound awfully familiar. Awfully familiar. They consisted of a haram, a sacred open air enclosure. So the enclosure itself is open to the air. It was accessible only to unarmed and ritually clean people in ritual clothes. And there the Beidel, or a raised stone, or a statue of the god, was worshipped. Again, the statues were late introductions. Nabateans originally represented their gods as Beetles on a podium. Later, they gave them human appearance, very often only semi-human. A lot of the images are kind of in between. And this is, Nabatea is where Petra is, for those who don't know. Of the Nabatean high places, it's south of Syria in the southern Levant. Of the Nabatean high places that are carved from the rock, the best known overlooks the site of Petra, which was their capital city, and there were these big carved. Triclinium is a Roman style dining room. So you'd have these big benches that you could all lie on with your feet point toward the wall. That's why they're really wide. And people would have ritual meals there. There would be beidels, sacrificial altar in a basin. Farther south in Hegra, it resembles the Masjid al-Haram, the masjid around the Kaaba, even more strikingly, because they didn't have the tricliniums. Those were adopted or invented there from and were not part of other rituals. And they would have, and their temple had, for example, an equivalent to the Zemzem. They had a special ritual bath outside of it, the open air enclosure, the beitels, all of the elements were there. Another one, and this article explains that the Kaaba in Mecca was similar because it had its closed cella. And this one says it was full of idols in pre-Islamic times. That is a tradition that comes from the Book of Idols. It is not reliable. That guy was writing up in Kufa. He was writing quite late. an earlier account written by a person whose entire family was native to Mecca, was from, had been in Mecca for generations, came from Mecca, they're Quraysh. He says that the only thing in the Kaaba was the idol of Hubal, paintings on the walls, and a goat skull. A goat skull.
Mm.
So they were not doing any acts on any altars. The
Of the
altars
altars.
were, yeah.
Because the
And
Egyptians used to do that, right? They would do that
I
with. I've
I
heard
don't
reports that they would do that with their animals, that they would let the animals copulate with the women. But
I would be very suspicious of a lot of those, because a lot of those people over there are really weird from other ancient people. So it's kind of like the medieval traditions where everybody's heard of some place where the Lord would insist on sleeping with the maidens on their wedding night, but it never actually existed, because it's like those people over there are weird. So I would be suspicious of it. I do not know for sure that it's not true. There was also, and this continues, that the Beidel was inserted in the wall, and then it had a veil cloth cover. A veil of cloth was also a very common element to these particular shrines. And as I said, the pillars of the Bible are these same stones. And this is, I do not have a source on this one here. Dang it. So this one is explaining how Nabateans had this too. And I wanted to point out this word here, nesebe, nesebe. If you look in the Quran, there's a word, and in the Hadith, there are words ansab and nasab and nusub, and all of these, same root.
right.
So whenever you find that in the Quran, this is talking about these Beidels. They usually mistranslate it on purpose and are pretending that these stones are, they're altars. They're altars made of stone. That's what they're. No, they're Beidels. They're mistranslating them to trick you, because the fact that there were tons of Beidels just bopping along makes everyone go, wait a second, what about that black stone? Because it's just another Beidel. And then the location where they were, it is written in the Nabatean language, and this is all during pagan times. This is before Christ, even mostly before the Roman conquest. Nabatea as a region is entirely Christian by the end of the 4th century AD. There are no pagans left there. It's all Christian, hundreds of years before Muhammad, all Christian. But backing up in time to when it was pagan, these places are also called Masjida. The J and the G are the same sound. Even now in dialects of Arabic, you will hear, in the Egyptian dialect, it's a more conservative dialect for that particular sound. At the time of Muhammad, guess what? If you went down to Mecca, it would be a hard G sound and not a soft J sound. So they had a pagan masjid there where they had their pagan Beidels, just like the Black Stone. So that's why.
Was that influenced by the Hebrew, or was the Hebrew influenced by that? Do you know?
No. So this is all pre-Hebrew. You mean the words or what?
Well, yeah. So masjid is also a word that comes from the rabbis in the rabbinic writings. You have that exact phrase. So the Jews are also using that as the word for synagogue.
It means literally a place of prostration.
Yeah, that's how they would
So
describe the synagogues in the Jewish kingdoms
yeah,
at that time.
they may have just borrowed the word from the locals. It would not have been. It was not used that way in Hebrew.
Okay.
So this would be a borrowing of a local term.
Okay.
So, but the pagan shrines are very often uh, referred to using this term because it's a place where people bowed. It's a place of prostration.
Right.
Then there are, this is just talking more about details about the Nabatean stones. But what is interesting is that there are written sources describing standing stones in the classical world that represent deities. And some of them refer to Arabs prior to the rise of Islam, and that includes a cult on southern Sinai, in the southern Sinai Peninsula. This guy is actually the Pilgrim of Piacenza, or Piacenza, if you've heard of the Pilgrim of Piacenza. And he's talking about one surviving group of pagans who were hanging out way out in the desert of Sinai, who are Arabs. They're Saracens. Saracen is used of all Arabs by the Romans. And it's talking about them bowing down to a snow white stone. So it's still hanging around in these little remaining pockets of pagans in the 6th century. We also find a much later source. It's talking about things that had happened earlier. It's not a period source. It's not talking about its own period, but it was saying that Dushara was venerated through a statue of a square block of stone, 4 feet tall and 2 feet broad. And this was a later development because at this point, in Nabatea specifically, they were often roughly shaping their stones when they didn't do other things to it. This one in particular, here you are, you're looking at Aphrodite. There she is. That is the first, when the Greeks found out about Aphrodite, went, man, we need this goddess. That is what they looked at. Aphrodite was introduced into Greek culture from the island of Cyprus, where she was worshipped through this meteorite. And this actually is a meteorite. It is a large, black, metallic meteorite. And in the Islamic sources, there are references to many battles that we don't have access to anymore. And not just one, but people later on who were coming for Hajj would be like, yeah, and we stopped by such and such, and here is that old Beetle that was so big that people, like basically a smoothed outcropping of rock that isn't easy to smash up. And it often took several hundred years to smash up the bigger ones. They're like, yeah, that used to be where they worshiped this goddess or that goddess or whatever. Very famously, the Emperor Elagabalus, who was Arab, brought his rock that represented Dushara to Rome and had it worshipped there. And the Romans are like, you guys are weird. But there are a number of other coins that are from Syria that have different pagan rocks on the back of them, where when the coins were minted in the Roman Empire and other places that have other local gods, well, there they just make a picture of a rock because the rock was their representation of their god.
So is this also a Venus for it to be Aphrodite?
Yeah, well, it's Ishtar. And
yeah.
Ishtar's Venus, right? So
Yeah.
Ishtar
is
Inanna, the daughter of Sin. So the Greeks did not actually have celestial gods per se. They had a goddess of the dawn, and they had a god of the daytime sky. Zeus was the god of the daytime sky, basically. But they didn't have, this planet and that planet and this other planet. Those were actually later accretions to it, and it really kind of began with Aphrodite, who kept her Venus identity being brought in. But this is Al-Uzza, which is, the loving one. This is Venus. This
Right.
is Ishtar. This is Inanna. All the same deity, just different names.
Right.
So there are strong memories of pagan stones that were centers of worship in the Islamic sources. And Umar was uncomfortable with the fact that they kept a beetle. These beetles over here we're going to destroy, we're going to break, we're going to throw away. But this black stone, this one's the good beetle, and we're still going to kiss it. He was kind of like, I'm not comfortable with this. I know you just have to be rock, but since Muhammad did it, we're going to do it too. When later groups became converts to Islam, they looked at that thing and they're like, why are you guys worshiping an idol? This is so clearly an idol. So they stole it and they smashed it and they threw it in the bottom of the latrine because they were so clear. So clear. And yes, this is the worshiping of sacred stones from the sky. Yeah, it was very common in this area. From, again, Phoenicia to South Arabia, all of those people and people influenced by them adopted these stones as the representations of their god, because they kind of thought of their gods as being too sacred to be depicted, but you can still control them and localize them through these special stones. And so, but Muhammad himself called it the hand of Allah. So if you are facing the black stone, you are facing the hand of Allah. So in addition to the black stone being clearly a pagan beetle, you also have other pagan memories of worshiping other pagan stones. We used to worship stones, and when we found a better stone than the first one, we would throw out the first and take the latter. But if we couldn't get a stone, then we'd collect some earth and bring a sheep, and then circle around that instead. So these are pagan activities. The black stone is a pagan stone, like a bunch of others. Even though he's trying to show here how silly it is the way they used to worship stones. Well, they're still circling around a certain stone. They're still kissing a certain stone, and it's just like all the others. So, and another account would talk about how that they would, whenever you stop, you'd try to find like a really attractive looking stone or whatever, and would then address it as a god. And here they're kind of making fun of that. Oh, some of them they use as the cooking pot supports because the 3-stone fire is the most ancient cooking technology, basically. But then this other one, their worship, ha ha ha, aren't they silly? But what they were doing was they were localizing the god of this area to make sure he was paying attention and getting their worship and would protect them and would not get angry at them for what they were doing. And it, again, is the same as the black stone. Oh, some stones you stick under a fire, and some stones you fight to kiss in the Kaaba. It's still the same thing. So again, even in the Kaaba currently, there are a bunch of stones. There isn't just the black stone. And Muhammad came up with different reasons to keep these various stones and why they shouldn't be, why they should still be. Came up with new stories for them, came up with new reasons for them, but he excused these various special holy stones. But the Kaabas and the Masajid, they were pagan. To these folks, they are in fact pagan. Here is a description of another pagan tribe circling around their own pagan beetle as well. And there are many other descriptions of them in the sources.
That's the booty shaking women, weren't they?
These are the booty women. These are the booty shaking women. Yep. There's a different. This one I chose because where there was a temple, that's a masjid, in which the people of the tribe of Daus used to worship the idol. But other versions of it have the booty shaking.
Yeah.
So there are 3 times when the word for Betel in Arabic appears in the Quran itself. In the Sahih International, they only translate it correctly 1 time. That's 743. The day will emerge from the graves as rapidly as if they were toward an erected idol hastening. So that erected idol there, that's the word. It's the nasab. It's the stone idol. All the other times, they just lie about it. Oh, you who have believed, indeed, intoxicants, gambling, sacrificing on stone altars to other than Allah. No, Badals. It's Badals. It's rocks that you worship. So rocks are defilement from the work of Satan. So these rocks, rocks that you worship are defilement from the work of Satan. And again, pretty much the same thing as in 5:3. It's just longer. The reason they falsely translate it is because anyone who's paying attention will be like, but what about the black stone? Isn't it one? Yes, it is. It's just one that he kept. So Muhammad himself also sacrificed to idols that were in the shape of these Badals, and then is like fussed at by one of the early Hanifa monotheists, like, oh, I will not eat these things that were sacrificed to this Badal over in Taif. So
It has to be sacrificed to your Badal.
Yes, it has to be sacrificed to the correct Badal, for heaven's sake. Like we gotta only sacrifice to one pagan idol, Allah's pagan idol. All the rest we smash, but we keep Allah's pagan idol. Because I mean, when Moses and the children of Israel went into the promised land, God clearly said to them, smash all the pillars except for the black stone of Allah, because I'm really Allah, and that pagan stone I want you to worship. Wait, no, he didn't say that.
Yep.
So, yeah.
The closest. So, what do you say to the people who would make the whataboutism of, oh, well, the Jews had to carry stones from the middle of the Jordan in order to be a remembrance for the future generations?
Well,
couldn't you say that those are Badals?
In Hebrew, I'm not sure whether on that particular place, but in a lot of places, the word is used for any stone that is erected for the purpose of any kind of remembrance. But things like marking the edges of fields are perfectly allowed.
Right.
Things like marking agreements, treaties is allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Things like marking important historical events, totally allowed. So you can use stones for marking, and actually I have a longer version of this where I talk about all the different ways in which stones are used historically by different cultures, but especially these cultures, and also in the Bible, and which ones are okay and which ones are not. But whenever it's talking about smash the standing stones, it's always in reference to things that are receiving worship, that aren't just marking an event, aren't just marking an agreement, aren't just marking a location to be remembered, because these were largely illiterate societies. A stele itself, which is a standing stone with the words written on it, is the more sophisticated version of what people used to do, which is just set up a stone and now we'll tell our kids about it, and that way we'll totally remember it. Which, of course, after a while you don't. But whenever you go to like steles across all kinds of different cultures, that's really where it's from. It's from the tradition of marking a place to remember. But there's a difference between marking something to remember it and erecting something to localize a god and then worship to it. So,
right.
So just understanding that there's this general background, general pattern that is pagan, that that Mecca completely follows. It is a totally ordinary type of place to be in the Hijaz at this time as a pagan site of worship with a totally ordinary pagan stone that people are worshiping. Nothing special about it. But now we need to talk about specific gods. What about this Allah dude? Who is he? Where did he come from? Where did he emerge from? Why the heck is there a site there? Why isn't why would anybody erect this site in that particular location? Why does anybody care? And it's a little bit of a complicated story because, again, like I said, the first Arabs who were there were from the general southern division of Arabs, but Muhammad's own family was from the north and took it over by violence from previous groups. So the first group that ever projected political control, rather than, hey, I'm a tribe and I'm fighting for this area and people just know this is mine, but actually having like the kind of kingdom type projection over this area, was Ma'in, or the Minions. So that the Minions were, this map is actually pretty bad because they were considerably farther south than that, but they were actually from the northern part of Yemen, and they were the first group to control the politically, not just as a tribe, not just as warring tribes, things like that, but the first organized kingdom to project its power over the frankincense road. 300 BC is really the height of their power. They went, and here it just says Nabateans, but there's actually a group called the Lihyanites that are between the Nabateans and the Minians that are very important as an interfacing group. But they physically traded along this route and physically traded all the way into Egypt, all the way out onto the Mediterranean islands. They were very active traders. And where they went, they brought worship of their own gods, especially their high god, who was Wad. This is a picture of a pillar on Delos. It's not very tall. It was there so that they could put their aniconic rock on it and bow down to it, and then it has an inscription on it in both Greek and in the old South Arabian Minian language, so that people would know what the heck this rock represents, because of course the Greeks would not be terribly familiar. Like, the Greeks were kind of puzzled by the fact that they were still bowing down to this aniconic rock at the temple in Cyprus when they took it over. So they're like, yeah, our Aphrodite is this rock. We don't really know why, but there she is. We've just kept her. So they're labeling it so that people know, like, don't pick it up and throw it away. This is actually their god. This is kind of important. And it was originally on an open air sanctuary where Minion traders would come kind of toward the end of their trading route to worship there, request protection, all of that kind of stuff. So where they went, they would bring the ability with them. They would set up temples to worship their god, even if it was just like a clearing with a rock in it. That was good enough. They could worship Wad with the rock in the clearing, and they considered this important. Their rival / ally, because they kind of fought over the same territory, but the Minions actually formed outposts in the Lihyanite cities. Is Lihyan. You also hear it called Dedan, because the Lihyani people are the tribe. Dedan is the city. The Lihyanites had conquered Dedan and become the uppermost group in Dedan, and then expanded and formed a kingdom. So I just call them Lihyanites. You might also hear them called Dedanites. But they controlled, here you'll see it's called Al-Ula. That's Hegra, or Al-Hijr, which is the important open sanctuary site that we were talking about before. And they kind of met a lot through the Minions. There was a lot of religious exchange between the northern Arabs and the South Arabians. They traded ideas. A lot of their gods already were identified with one another, even when this period started, and they became more enmeshed, and their religion became more syncretized over time. So this Lihyan in the north and Minion in the south is a very important connection for understanding Mecca in the middle. So the Yemenite pantheons.
We do have a question.
Oh, yep. Go for it.
So is it true of people of pre-Islamic Saudi Arabia used to worship gods in weird shapes or geometric shapes?
Well, sometimes they talk about Beetles being in the shape of cubes or blocks. And that was kind of a later, they were originally, as far as I know, originally they were always not shaped by humans. But later on, with the kind of light influence of Hellenism, they would roughly make big cubic blocks and then make these funky little faces on them that they kind of look like SpongeBob SquarePants, a little face on them, but it's a tiny little face to like be something that isn't quite the natural beetle, but also isn't a truly carven idol, something in between. So when you're
Mm,
talking about funny shapes, you'll find them talking about, and here they had a block of this direction by this direction, and that's referring to these later periods, and mostly in the north, where it was had more influence from the Hellenistic world than in the south. So
so do they treat the cubic ones as more important? Like, do they try to shape it into a cube and then sand it really good and get it real smooth and neat so you couldn't tell it was like shaped to try to keep like the Beetle aesthetic of an uncarved stone that
well they
had to be a
were
unique shape?
well they were very very smooth, but people at that time were very able to produce smooth stones.
Right.
The one I'm thinking of has rounded edges, and that was probably done deliberately. um,
Okay.
Either that or people just loved on it a lot, because the whole reason why Aphrodite there is really smooth, it's because people kept touching her. Because just
Right.
like the black stone, the thing you would do is you would touch it and kiss it and caress it and get
Right.
stuff from it by touching it. So
So I've never actually rubbed a meteorite. If it's that metallic, would it like build up static electricity and would you like feel the energy as you're touching it and that's why like it feels special?
no, no, they would do it to
Oh,
all their
just
stones, and some of them are white
okay.
stones. It's just a really funky looking stone for its location, because it wouldn't look like any
Okay.
other stone around it. But and I can't imagine what they would do in areas with glaciers, with the glacial rocks, pushed from far away. They definitely get excited about those, but
Oh yeah.
there weren't any glaciers there, so we will never know what they would have thought. Um, so the connections between these areas becomes evident in things like Sayan, who was became adopted by the Minions and is found all the way in Delos too. So the Delos Island place where the Minions had set up this place to worship. Um, Wad, well, they also set up a place to worship Sayan, whom they had adopted from their neighbors. In general, in South Arabia, the head god was identified with the moon. And that's not to say that he was the god of the moon any more than Ishtar was considered to be in her various later versions to be of Venus. And in this, like, you don't look up at the moon and go, "Oh, I see my god." You don't look up at
Right.
Venus and go, "Oh, I see Ishtar." It is that was considered worthy of them. That identification was worthy of them. So it's kind of used almost like an honorific to consider them associated with the moon in some way.
Right. That
So
got into one question I had about, obviously the crescent moon and star comes from Turkey, like way late into history, way after Islam. Like Islam didn't have the crescent moon for a very, very long time. But the crescent moon and Venus, you can see very, very clearly together once a month, but with the naked eye, whenever the moon is waning.
yeah.
Um, how important was that to? Because I know it was important to the Sabians. Was it important to the pagans in the Hejaz?
Well, it's really interesting because people will tell you that Islam was not associated with the crescent moon until the Ottomans, but that's actually false.
Okay.
The crescent was placed, and the crescent that looks like bullhorns very often.
Right.
But it's
From
like,
Amalek.
yeah,
Or
well,
yeah.
all kinds of
Right.
the gods
Right.
were use these kind of bullhorny type crescents where it's oriented kind of like a canoe, with the open
Yeah.
side up. So these were, um, you will, when they built the Dome of the Rock, before it was rebuilt, it had that on it. It had that on it
Mhm.
during the time of the Crusades. So anyone who's telling you that this is later, it's just false. Things like you start crying out about the Hajj when you see the crescent of the moon, and the moon itself being incredibly important. In uh, Whenever you get to, the Hebrews had a lunar calendar. And so they marked things by the first time you see the moon, after that time, whatever. But the moon itself was not a focus. The moon absolutely is a focus, because you look up, you see the moon, and then you have the special moon cry that you give upon seeing the moon. That's very important. Huge amounts of this is very, very lunar focused. It is intensely lunar focused.
That's where Wad and Hadud comes in.
And well, we don't know for sure whether or not looking up and calling out was said necessarily to Wad, but we do know that it was the pagan practice before Hajj. So all the Hajj, oh well, you have the whatever it's called, Hilaliya or whatever it's called, where you look up the moon and then you call out Allahu Akbar and other things, and you do all the stuff and all of your various things that start then for the Hajj. That's just lifted straight up from pagan times. You just don't say certain things that you used to say, and you only say certain things, most of which were also said during pagan times. You just clip out the parts that Muhammad decided were too pagan. That's why you have this really funny story where during the Hajj, people are like, "Hey, Muhammad, you've made up reasons why we can still run from Al Safa to Marwa, which is great, and we can do this and we can do that. Could you make up a reason why we can continue to hang our weapons on this special weapon hanging tree?" And hanging things on trees is a very common pagan practice, but there was a particular
Mhm.
place with a particular tree between Mecca and Taif, and
Is
they
it the
were asking
Gotham?
Muhammad to come up with a reason why we can keep this pagan practice too. And Muhammad just declined. But why were they asking to keep a pagan practice? This was associated with the worship of a certain god. Because all the rest of the stuff was associated with the worship of other gods too. The whole reason you like go out into the middle of nowhere and do in the direction of Taif and then don't do stuff for a long time is because you used to go all the rest of the way to Taif and do stuff to a lot there and then come back. You just kind of, now you don't have anything to do there, so you just sit in the desert and hang out for a while instead. So it's the same thing. It's just edited. Um, it's significant. So of the Yemeni gods, these are the old South Arabian gods. Several of them are important. Wad was the one who already mentioned. It was a high god. This would have been the god of a Meccan shrine set up by the Minions. That's who they would have set up to. That is their high god, and I'll give lots of reasons for it being the god that it was set up to in a moment. Aside from just this connection, well, it's Minion times, should be the Minions, should be Wad. Well, you need better reason than that to say that it's that. He was associated with serpents specifically, which gets really interesting when you go to the Islamic sources. Etymologically, his name means love, so he should be associated with love. He should be a god of love. And so that probably points to Al Uzza originally being his consort. But later on, the tradition of the three daughters of Il, which was the old South Arabian name for God, whoever the high God was, became applied to Wad as well. And so, in many times, Wad was a father of the the three daughters of God. Everybody was a father of three uh, daughters of God. It just depended on which high God he particularly worshipped as to which God that was. Uh, but that association came from the South. But another important high God was the high God uh, of Balau, who was the high god of Aswan. We find him by way of Lichian reaching Nabatea, where he is probably called Ha-Balau. And most likely, he either began as Baal, and the version of his name changed when he came to the south, or when he reached the north and became Ha-Balau at first. And there are very complicated grammatical reasons why the W doesn't matter in Nabatean that we'll not go into. But when he reached the north, he may have then been combined with Baal. But one way or another, he gets identified with Baal. And I'm going to step through that a little bit, with a little
I do
bit
have
of
a
clarity.
question.
Mm-hmm.
So the crescent moon and star from Canaan or other place? I know it's down in Yemen in the 10th century BC with Saba. Is
Yeah,
where else was it originating from?
I think that it was even in Sumer. Like it's just
Okay.
really, really old because one of the most important gods was Sin, the moon god, and
Mhm.
his daughter Inanna was very, very important too.
Right.
And even in the time of the Neo-Sumerian kingdom, they were the most important. Like the other gods were technically higher than them, but practically speaking, they were the most important to the ruling family. Um, and even at the time, actually, it goes all the way back. I should go back further than that. It goes all the way back to the Akkadian Empire. So
Oh,
uh,
wow.
the first recorded author of any work, like where you know the person who made up a work of literature, was the priestess of Sin, who is writing something to Inanna. So
Interesting. So that's like 1800s BC, give or take?
that is earlier than that. The Akkadian
Okay.
Empire fell in 2150.
Okay.
So and
Wow.
yeah, so it's very, very ancient. The
Yeah.
actual iconography, the first time it appears, it's definitely around by the time the Assyrians show up. So,
Mhm.
but it's very ancient, and they just picked up on it. Like they weren't imbuing it with extra special meaning. That's just this is the indication for what we are trying to talk about. Just
Right.
like it's just the iconography for it. So what is interesting is that Wad is recorded specifically and explicitly as being one of the idols of the Kaaba. So while they say, oh, there are 360 idols of the Kaaba, they actually, their list of idols are not that long, especially of idols that really are supposed to be in the Kaaba. Wad is one of only a few. Abd Wad is among the theophoric names of the Meccans. A theophoric name means a God bearing name. Abd Wad means servant of Wad, just like you have Abdullah, servant of Allah, being a pagan name. Well, Abd Wad was a pagan name for the Meccans, even in the time of around the time of Muhammad. It is the only clearly South Arabian deity name among any of the recorded theophoric names of the Meccans. Very interesting. Um, and when there is South Arabian writing found in the north, it's almost always done by minions. So if you're in the Ptolemaic, in the Ptolemaic uh, Egypt, you'll find writings of old South Arabian, and that will be these minions because they were the big traders, they were the travelers, they went places, and so that would be something that you might expect. Now, the serpent connection specifically to the Kaaba is really, really interesting because there is this odd story about them not rebuilding the Kaaba after a rainstorm when a snake came out of the ruins. That they wouldn't rebuild it until a bird came and carried the snake away. And this may be a kind of a coded story of well, Wad, the pagan god, is gone. We believe in Allah now, kind of thing. But in reality, Allah and Wad, to the pagans, were the same thing, and so is Hubal, as you'll see in a moment. They're all, when it was set up to Wad, but again, these are pagans, they syncretize. And when new people from the north, they're not from the south anymore, they're not associated with the south, the Kahanites are the southern Arabs, northern Arabs come in, they want gods they're more familiar with, and they're like, oh, this Wad god, well, he's the high god, so we know Hubal's our god, and he's already being called Allah or something like that. So it was easy to combine them to a certain degree. The fact that the Sakina, as it is, or Shekinah, borrowed word from Hebrew into Arabic, is said in a number of places to resemble a snake, is very, very interesting. And it's also associated with the story that Muhammad made up of Hagar being guided by God. Well, she was guided by the Sakina, which is a snake-shaped thing that comes and guides her to the Kaaba. Really interesting, strong serpent imagery associated with the Kaaba in several places. Other evidence of the early importance of Wad is that Wad is often mentioned in the sources as a very relevant deity. Al-Kalbi notices that the Arabs preserved nothing of their poetry except for those poems immediately preceding Islam. But even though Wad was not a deity who's very well worshipped or very well known, certainly not important to the Himyarites, they were Jews, and then later on, most people in that area became Christians, and then the Sasanians took over, who were Zoroastrian. Wad's just not very important anymore, but they remember Wad, and they talk about Wad, and they have this recollection of Wad being this early primordial deity. The Quran also identifies kind of two basic patterns as primordial deities. One are the celestial gods, the sun and the moon and the stars and stuff like that, and the other is this list of four, the first of whom is Wad. Wad is the first one of these primordial pagan deities that were remembered. Two of them probably weren't legitimate deities at all. There's an explanation of what they probably from here rather than being an actual deity. Of the two that are attested, first one's Wad. Most likely, the Minian Masjid was founded in the 3rd century, in the 200s AD. Not as a permanent settlement, but there were two parallel frankincense or incense roads, one that went along the shoreline, one that stayed along the upper plateau and was the older one, and then periodically there would be branches that would connect them, and this was probably one of the earliest branches that connected them, going from Taif down to Jeddah through the mountains, and at a stopping place where they found a funky stone, they probably said, oh look, funky stone, let's set up something to our God here, and then he'll continue to protect us on our journey. There was no permanent settlement at this time. if you read the sources carefully, you find out that it isn't until the Quraysh take it over that they cut down trees and build houses, and because all of this violated this sacred space where nothing is supposed to be damaged, nothing is supposed to be cut. You're not supposed to do any of this stuff here. But the leader of the Quraysh are like, the gods say we can do this. Let's do it, and then convince them to do it. The fact that there is a memory of the place being potentially called Makrab, which is a legitimate South Arabian word form for a temple, is really interesting too, and very suggestive that this was a South Arabian temple. The fact that they've remembered this one random word that was used for temples and South Arabia and nowhere else, in a different language, not in Arabic. Also very interesting. It was this completely open place at this time as well. So Lihyan also becomes very important here. As I mentioned, it had a masjid that had an ablution simmer, just like Mecca would later on. Its main gods begin with the owner of the unseen. And yes, this is the semantic equivalent to the unseen that's often mentioned in the Quran. Very interesting. They adopted Wad. Wad was so popular that they adopted him from the minions. They also had Ha-La, which is a contraction that is semantically equivalent to Allah. So that's really our first Allah of this time too. So they were doing that thing. And the question is, who was he a title of? It could possibly be a title of Wad as the father of three goddesses, because the term was most often God, or the god of the three daughters. They would use just the generic term God of the three daughters for this deity. So the emergence of the term as a title may be connected to this. Later on, I have a reference to the scholarly paper on it. It's in French, but it's a good paper.
Oh no.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There's actually amazing amounts of stuff in French that are really good. They had Harvey, which was a scribal god, which was also worshipped in Mecca, and Al-Uzza, who of course is called here Han-Uzza because it's not, they don't speak Arabic here. They speak ancient North Arabian or language that is a sister to Arabic. So things are slightly different. They don't have Al, for example.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yes.
So the Manians, whenever they were spreading their cult to Wad, they had their like secret inscription that they would inscribe on everything and just sent it out all over the place. And that inscription was mostly "Wad is our father." Is that related to the three goddesses as well?
Well, the so-and-so is our father was a very common theophoric thing in Old South Arabia for a number of gods. So it's
Okay.
not just lots of people said that so-and-so is my father, so-and-so is my father. It was a common, even a theophoric name, rather than just slave of so-and-so. So-and-so is our father would be a very common
Right.
theophoric name. So
Right.
I would expect, if it's what is my father, I would expect that was probably most likely a dude's name,
Okay.
because
Well, it also had the crescent moon on it as well. So there was a lot of the inscriptions of Wad that we have that I was reading through
mhm.
last week was on that, and it had that on most of them. So I didn't know if that was related to his status as a father, because someone was making a case of Allah in Islam is the only deity in the region that's not actually a father. Like it's normative to have your God
Yeah,
be a
it
father
is.
in some
It
sense.
it is
It's very
normative.
weird for
Yeah.
Allah to not be a father.
It was very weird for Allah not to be a father, because he was a father as the pagan god Allah. He was
Right.
the father of Manat, Al-Uzza, and Alat. And that
Right.
those three goddesses emerged as daughters of a god in South Arabia. And yeah, he was during the pagan era to everyone. But I think that got erased specifically because Muhammad needed to separate Allah from what they had believed about him for so long. And
Right.
they're like, no, they're just angels or demons or something. They're not his kids. And if they can't be his kids, well, he doesn't have any kids. So I think
Right. We do have a
oh,
question here. Where do the Nabateans come from?
well, they had been settled for a really long time by the time uh, Petra became an important city. All so uh, they did come from the Hara region of modern day Jordan, basically, and Syria. Um, that is the homeland of Arabic speakers. And so they didn't actually move all that far whenever they kind of founded Petra, Nabatea, and all that sort of stuff. Um, they may be the original founders.
Okay.
So there's not anything to really indicate that they took over. It could have also been that they were Edomites originally, and then just it happened over and over and over again in the Middle East. When you
Right.
have settled people in a city, they do not reproduce at a replacement rate. The nomads near them eventually outnumber them, and their language replaces the previous language. It happened over and over again in Sumer. The Akkadian replaced Sumerian, and then the Amorite replaced Akkadian, and then Chaldean replaced uh, Akkadian to some degree, or Amorite to some degree. But what really replaced it was Aramaic, and Aramaic came from the spread of the Aramaeans, who were, some parts of them were these more country nomadic folks. So over and over again, you kind of get these not necessarily conquests. A lot of times, sometimes they were conquests. A lot of times they weren't really conquest so much as mass migrations over many years.
Yeah. You just breed them
So,
out. Eventually, you're taking over.
yep. It really is a demographics is destiny written over and over and over and over again in the Middle East here
Throughout
with all these
history.
different languages getting replaced.
Yep.
So there are less commonly attested names. So there are also theophoric names that show up only as theophoric names and not in other inscriptions. Something that's really interesting is that the title of the priest for the chief deity has the root SLH, which is Saleh, who's supposed to be a prophet of Allah. But in Dedan, or in specifically in Al-Ula or Hegra, this title was the name of the priest of the unseen one, the owner of the unseen, or the priest of Wad. And the word actually natively means messenger or apostle. So he was the apostle of Wad, or the apostle of the unseen, as the name of a guy given the position of prophet of this very place, Hegra, in the Quran. So they are naming the title of the messenger of Wad as a prophet of Allah, which I thought was kind of interesting. And again, this stuff is all in the book that talks about all of this is in French, but it's really good. It's really good. It's
Right.
I have the source written out here somewhere. So
So
something else that's
Nabi
important,
comes from the Hebrew as well. So for the prophet in Arabic,
which does
uh, Nabi, Navi,
yes,
Nabi,
yes, but
Navi.
we're not. But
Yeah.
this is apostle or messenger. This is not prophet.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the Rasul. Uh, the owner of the unseen, is that also rabbinic in any way? Have you seen that That's one of the things I
I
meant to look into that I haven't yet.
I have not seen that. This
Okay.
interpretation is Al-Jalad's interpretation of this phrase. Previously, most people had like interpreted it as the owner of the thicket. They were interpreting thicket, but Al-Jalad is like, no, no, this is definitely unseen. This is not thicket.
Right.
So, and unseen makes a lot
Interesting.
more sense anyway. Is Wad different from the owner of the unseen? Uncertain, but it seems like because there was only one apostle or messenger at a time, it's not like there are 50, there can be 50 priests. This is in the Danite language, which is a very near cousin of Arabic. It's a very, very near cousin of Arabic. It is an ancient North Arabian language, but not all ancient North Arabian languages are like they're not the same language. They're cousins, but this is a very close cousin.
And most of these words are going to be circulating in multiple languages in the area throughout
Yes,
time.
yes, and
Yeah.
again, this is like the difference between Spanish and Portuguese is probably
Right.
greater than the difference here. The difference is
Right.
very small between these languages, and a
Right.
lot of the roots. They're all Semitic roots, so a lot of
Right.
this will be easily learned, if not necessarily mutually intelligible. Um,
Right.
but
I was looking at the Minion script and I was like, "Oh, that looks a lot like Phoenician." That's funny because I was like making out letters and I,
yeah,
I I can read Phoenician, so I was like trying to make out the sentence
well,
because I thought it was Phoenician at first, and then I was like, "Oh, I don't actually know his language."
yeah, they're
That's
all
weird.
from so all of these scripts, every script that is alphabetic today
Comes
um,
from Egypt, which comes
comes
from
from
Hebrew,
Egypt,
which
which
goes
comes
to
from the
Phoenician.
Sinaitic, and so this is an
Yeah.
early Sinaitic language. So it has a lot in
Right.
common with Phoenician and a lot in common with Paleo Hebrew and all of
Right.
those things.
Yeah.
So they are,
The Jews invented language.
yeah, yeah. But notice that the concept of the root is to send, aka apostle or messenger. So this is the messenger of Awad who is getting called. The title of that title in Dedan is being in Hegra is being associated with the prophet of Hegra of Allah, according to the Quran, which I found hilarious because this is totally pagan, 100% pagan, unquestionably pagan dude, unquestionably pagan place. You can see like the well that was there. That round thing is the ablution location. Something also that is interesting is that they do talk about pilgrimage was a common word in all the Semitic languages, but they talk about
Right.
pilgrimages and inscriptions too. Same word as Hajj. Um,
Mhm.
so thought that
It's
that was interesting.
Hajj in Hebrew.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
It's all the same word, just of a pilgrimage. But how did Wad, if Mecca was originally the shrine of Wad, how did it become the shrine of Hubal? How did that happen? So here is a method by which it could happen. There are two kind of variants to this. A lot of linguists think that it is really Ha Baal, meaning the Baal, or else Hu Baal, meaning he is Baal. But the big question is, how does the Ain drop out of this name? Because it's Ba and then Al. It's got an
Right.
Ain, but it's Ba first, a full syllable, then Ain for the Al. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's an odd way for it to drop out. But we do know that there is no Hamza in the Hijaz, which means the glottal stop. Whenever we say Baal in English, we're actually
Right.
saying it with the glottal stop. But I think that it is very difficult to say Ba'ain without putting in a glottal stop. So you kind of just insert it in there almost automatically because it's really hard to say without it. And it's possible that whenever you don't have any kind of stop of that sort, that it collapsed the vowels together and you lost the two different distinct vowels because they were clashing too much with one another. And then arrived in Yemen as Balal, the high god. That W, it's added for nominatives as an U. It may be sticking around as a consonant to turn it into a proper trilateral root so that you can do things grammatically with it at that time.
Right.
But the W or U was appended to names similarly in Nabatea. So if it was in Nabatea as that form, it would be parsed as being a grammatical element and not properly part of the name. Alternatively, it is possible that it did truly originate in Aswan, but then got identified with Baal whenever it travels north. And this alternatively is from me. The major theme is from The Religion of the Nabateans, a conspectus by John F. Healy. It would have picked up a ha and Lihyan or Daden. This is my deduction because Nabatea, I believe it's been a while since I read this. I think that they kind of lost the determinative entirely, if I remember correctly. But it would not have been he is Baal there, because what is who in Hebrew would be hua there, and that would be way too many syllables for that to have happened. And then it appears in Nabatea, it does appear in writing as HBLW. And in this case, the ha is fossilized to the word, and the W is being read as grammatical and gets picked up and carried down into Mecca again as Hubal, which becomes Hubal through dissimulation. So that would be the phonetic trip. All of these are quite plausible. I think the strongest argument for Hubal being Baal is the Samad that we're going to talk about in a moment, that is associated with Allah in Mecca. And how the heck did he get associated with Samad? Well, really only makes sense through Baal, because the folk etymology given to it is very goofy by Muhammad. So
Right. I mentioned that in chat earlier, actually. I ran okay.
Yep.
I didn't mention the stela that's on them, but yeah.
Yeah, and this is a quote. It's not actually called the Kalamu inscription. It's called something else. I forgot to correct it. This is a quote. I didn't get this quote. I quoted this quote from someone else, but I looked up the original stele and was able to locate that and confirm that Baal, and here it's Tzemed is what is written in this transliteration. It is literally the same grammatical equivalent to Samad. So Baal Samad, who belongs to Gabar, smash his head, is what it means.
Right.
So it is truly a title of Baal. This is not something that kind of shows up with Baal, something that Baal has. No, together this is a title of Baal, specifically Baal Hadad, the storm god of Ugarit. So
yeah, I've read that stela before. There's like 3 different Baal titles on it, and that's just one of them. Yeah,
and that is
he's calling on the different Baals to do different things. That's one of them.
Yeah. Well, this one, that there are occasionally different gods who are called Baal, but by this point, for the most part, they are more likely to be different titles, because they really, really like their Baal and Hadad. That they really like them. And yes, smash Allah. Then that's what he does. He smashes people. Allah smash rather than smash Allah. But the association of this word with him is, Muhammad had no idea why you should call him a Samad. Because in Arabic, its meaning is like solid. And so he came up with this wild story where humans have noses and buttholes. And so we are topologically cylindrical. We have one hole that goes all the way through. Whereas Allah, while he has like lungs, there is not a continuous hole to a butthole. He lacks a butthole, and so he is solid. That's what he came up with. Muhammad is a big guy for folk etymologies, and his folk etymologies are always completely insane. But every time he used them, it's because he used some sort of special term. And people are like, what does this term even mean anyway? And he has to come up with a reason for having used it. And then he comes up with this wild story. It's not like he came up with the wild story first and then added the word with it. No, he's making up this insane story as a coping mechanism because, yes, Allah, solid butthole, or lacking buttholeless Allah. And associated with that is his absolute hatred of pooping. So,
yeah, it's one of my favorite hadith. Other than like the Moses chasing a rock naked, beating with the stick, to expose his wonderful genitalia to the people. Like, that's by far my favorite hadith. It's a 10 out of 10. One of my second favorites is Satan crawling through the nose into Adam as a statue and then out his butthole to check whether or not it's Allah, because Allah is solid. So he's checking if the statue in front of him, which he can't tell if it's God or not.
Because they look identical. Yeah.
Because they're identical. Yeah, because he's like 80 cubits tall or whatever. And then, that comes from the rabbis, of course, with him stretched up to the heavens.
Well, actually, Adam had to get shrunken down because when he was first thrown down, he was 500 years tall because he was scraping the heaven with his head. So Allah then shrunk him to the 80 cubits. So that's
which again, that's how the rabbis describe it.
Yep. Gotta shrink him down. But identical to Allah, and you find out whether or not he has a butthole. Very important detail here. So it's important to note that Baal was never a moon god, but Hubal in Mecca is because of inheriting this identity along with Wad of being the God with three daughters, the three daughters of God, and that God, three daughters of Allah, and that Allah being Wad, and now that Allah being identified with Hubal, he takes on aspects of the syncretic character between these. Now, Baal is inherently a weather god, and we expect to find the chief deity of the Kaaba to be uniquely responsible for weather in a way that is not found in the ancient North Arabian inscriptions if he has the characteristics of Baal. If Hubal is Baal, we expect lots of weather stuff. And in fact, we do have Allah being the bone breaker and the storm maker, the rain maker, are two very, very important aspects of his character in pre-Islamic Arabia. And that bone breaker connects to his samad, which literally meant the divine club. So being the bone breaker, probably associated with his divine club. And again, may Baal of the divine club smash his head, is what's being said on that inscription. And then the rainmaker, that would point to Baal Hadad in a way that you don't find ascribed to Wad. So again, you have this special storm connection. He also gets layered on top of that, the idea that he is the creator, but that happens under the pressure of monotheism all around. Well, we worship the creator. You're just worshiping this storm god. No, he's the creator. He totally created everything. The traditional story of Hubal's arrival is that this was already a pre-existing site, and then somebody went and grabbed an idol from Syria and brought it down. Another one says the Lakhmids, but later things often try to credit the Lakhmids because of Kufa being near the Lakhmid place. So anytime that they're trying to connect the Hijaz to the Lakhmids, press X to doubt. It's just not very likely. But that he was brought down from Syria specifically as an actual carved idol because they wanted to be up with the trends. They're the cool folks. So we have our Beidel. We have our pagan Beidel. But we also need to be up with the trends and attract all the remaining pagans to come to our place for their Hajj. So let's get ourselves a true carved idol. And so they brought in a carved idol into a place that had only previously had, as a representation of the main god, the an iconic rock. Baal was probably introduced with the first northern tribe that took over from the southern tribe. The Quraysh were the second who kicked them out. And this time Mecca was the place of the last hurrah of the pagans. All of those older sites, like in Hegra, had become Christianized. They were completely abandoned by the end of the 4th century. By 400 AD, there were no pagans left in all of the north. The
And in the
Lakhmids,
south, they became Jews and then Christians.
yeah, and in the far south, they became Jews and Christians. And so
Yeah.
you just kind of have this island of minor tribes left, and they're still all pagan. They used to go to Hegra and other places like that for their pilgrimages. They need places for pilgrimages. It's a new place to start up your tourist attraction, this unimportant temple that becomes more important at this point. And there was kind of like this pilgrimage route through various sites in the Hijaz that tried to attract people and were rivals of one another. Al-Uzzah's, Alat's, and Manat's various shrines were rivals to one another, but they're like, hey, we've got the high god. We got the one who's the daddy of all of them. We're the most important. All of your worship should be centered around us. But Muhammad really grew out of a place where these pagans were realizing that the world was coming to an end. A lot of their importance depended upon being the center for this pilgrimage, because people would come, they would slaughter their animals, they would have all of these skins to trade, they would also pay money, and they shaped it in different ways, but basically they paid money to the Quraysh for the privilege of coming here. So it was really important to them to keep this up, but at the same time, everybody's turning to Christianity or Judaism or Zoroastrianism, and they're all alone, and the world's shrinking. Fewer tribes are coming every year. What are they going to do? And so there had been debates among people who are like, no, we need to become Christians. Then we can even have alliances against the Sasanians, whom they were really afraid of, because they were the ones closest to them, who had previously projected power over Mecca, people from Yemen. So they were scared that Yemen was going to come and smash them. Well, now we can have alliances with the Ethiopians or with the Romans, because we'll be Christians. But then why won't anyone come here? And we won't be following the gods of our fathers, and nobody will come to our shrine, because that's the only reason anyone cares about us. Like, it was a huge debate. These are recorded in the Islamic sources. Your eyes are just kind of cross over and you glaze over them, because it's just this mess of names and details and factions and things. And you're just like, who are these people? I don't know. Let's get to Muhammad. But this is a very important background for this. Now, something else that's important is that the theophoric names in this pagan time show that Hubal is actually Allah. Because you have Abdullah or Abdullah, right? You have Abdullah, but you do have occasionally Abdwad, but you never have Hubal. You only have Abdullah. That means that Abdullah has to be Allah.
Right.
Abdullah is very, very rare. Instead, you get a lot of Abshams, who would be the equivalent of Alat. You get plenty of Abdumat, Abduluzza, Admanaf, but that really points to Hubal being Allah. The fact that you never find Hubal. If he is the idol in the Kaaba, why isn't anybody naming their kids after him? Well, they are. They're naming him Abdullah. Abdullah is Hubal. It's the same thing. Exactly the same.
So for Shams is the female goddess of the sun that
Yeah.
came about later in Yemen. Uh, is Allah also related to the sun? And if
Uh,
that is the case, is Hubal related to the moon at all?
well, like I said, Hubal became associated with the moon through
This-
the fact that this was a Yemeni shrine, right? And Wad was associated with the moon. When all of this gets syncretized, he gets kind of lined up to it. So I
Right.
don't
Okay.
say Allah is a moon god. Well, no, Allah is in a place where moon was always associated with high deity. In the same
He's
way,
syncretized into it.
right? In the same way,
Yeah.
Shams, the sun, becomes associated with the mother goddess figure because Al-Uzza is who? Al-Uzza is Venus.
Right.
Manat is a goddess of fate who's not associated with the sun ever, but the mother goddess gets associated with the sun in various places. Sometimes the wife, sometimes the daughter of the high god. So that's how a lot would line up with Shams. And also under the pressure of the Hellenistic era, by this point, the Greeks were very organized by this point. They want everything to be neat and organized, especially the Greek and the Romans. You know, the Romans are like the world's first accountants, really. I mean, like how they run everything, right? Very, very
Right.
organized people, big on very detailed bureaucracy. And the idea of assigning in a systematic way gods to planets really happens in this interface, and it may be a an influence of the and it's partly tied up with forecasting fates and futures and horoscopes and stuff like that, that this becomes a big thing.
Yeah.
But all of this is kind of connected, and this is more of the kind of thing that would happen at this end of antiquity age at this point. I have like seven was an important number, the generally, but circling around seven times might be associated with the seven heavenly bodies specifically. And I have managed to find seven fairly important deities in that area that line up to uh, the same types of gods that you get in the Roman system by this point, which I
Right.
don't have here because that's a little bit extra. Like I said, I
Yeah.
have massive amounts of stuff. But
One other question before we move
yes.
on. For
Mhm.
Rahman, I've been trying to make the case, or I've been trying to look into the case that Rahman comes from Rahm, or the mercy in the rabbinic writing, because that's the word for the giver of mercy in Hebrew. Is that also a pagan deity specifically? Because I've
No,
heard
no,
that
no,
before. I
no.
just
It's
didn't
never
know.
used.
Okay.
So I kind of have so over on the left in this column, these are common, or Wad is actually not very common, but these are the more common. Um, Abd Halal, by the
Goddesses and
way, would
gods.
be servant of the moon, by the way. And then there are less common ones over there. Kulal is potentially some kind of whoever got syncretized to Athena, possibly at this time. But Rahman is absolutely borrowed from Yemen and is only ever found as the monotheistic God, first by the Jews, later by the Christians. It is when they converted to Judaism, what they decided to call their God was a completely native word for mercy. That is not a word that is directly borrowed from Aramaic or Hebrew or anything like that. It's an Old South Arabian, has basically the same, very, very similar form. Um,
Mm,
and
just
they
Semitic roots
right,
basically came up with the same stuff. Okay.
right. And they chose that over the name or the Holy One, or which are which is a lot more common in rabbinic writings.
Right. Talk of those.
I have not personally found in the rabbinic writings, and I went to the Aramaic lexicon that has like all Aramaic writings are supposed to be systemized from 900 BC to 1200 AD. And I have found a few cases where it's just used of mercy generally in the rabbinic writings, and occasionally of the mercy of God, but I have not found it in Aramaic being used as the name of God. In like a description of God, yes. I haven't found it being used as the name of God. And I can drop the Aramaic lexicon.
Yeah, but I found in Rosh Hashanah that it has El Rahman va Chaknonon. So it's a God merciful and gracious.
Yeah,
It's very similar form to the Quran, but it's not used as a title, right? Which gets into like the 13 attributes of mercy. But even in that, they have God's name as Yahweh.
Yeah, and of course they don't want to. They don't want to say it, and they don't transliterate Yahweh into other languages anyway. So they were coming up with their own name that is appropriate to the character of God as understood by Jews.
Right.
In this
Actually,
case,
we do have a Greek transliteration from the Qumran scrolls, from the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a Greek transliteration that is very similar to Yahweh.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Because it's not something that they typically did very often.
Before the Second Temple Judaism, apparently they had it. So
yeah.
we have 4 different transliterations into Greek, 2 of them by Christians, 2 of them by Jews, and all 4 of them have that Yahweh or Yahweh. So it's 2 syllables, and it's the Yah always, and then the last syllables are different. But because there's no W in Greek, at least at that point in time, because the digamma was gone and they just didn't have a way to do W. It's Yahweh or Yahweh. Yeah. Or Yahweh is how another one tries to say it, but we do have them. Just only in Greek. That's the only one. That's the only ones I've been able to find.
Yeah. And not that late, because that was the Talmudic period when the Himyarites converted.
Right.
So we are running later than I wanted to, but almost done. Almost done. So there are various places in the early Islamic sources that show people standing. They walk in front of Hubal and then say, "Oh Allah," and other things like that. So Allah and Hubal are identified with one another, however accidentally, in early Islamic sources, which is quite telling, because you don't go, "Oh, I brought him to my sister Anne. Hello, Elizabeth." Like, that would be different people. But in this case, it's the same person. And when Muhammad was brought by Abdul Muttalib before Hubal in the middle of the Kaaba, Abdul Muttalib stands and prays to Allah. So Hubal, he's saying from Hubal, praying to Allah. Why? Because they're the same God. So all of the pre-Islamic inscriptions with the name Allah are pagan. Most mention other gods in addition to Allah. So these are not monotheistic inscriptions. They cannot be, because many of them are mentioning other gods as well. Paganism dies in the north by 8400, so all of these inscriptions disappear 200 years before Islam, because the only people doing many inscriptions were in the north. They weren't in the Hijaz. Inscriptions exist there, but are very rare. Again, as I mentioned before, Allah seems to have been created to parallel Alat, who was by far the most important North Arabian Bedouin deity. I already explained how Alat came into being. And thus Allah is parallel to that, is not a derivation of the Most High One. As I've mentioned before, Alat was originally the mother goddess of Shera, and Ishtar, Astarte, who were smooshed together. But specifically in Nabatea, but everywhere else they remain distinguished. It's only in that one. You would think that given how similar their names are, they would get smushed together way more, but they don't. I get them confused if I'm not careful. I just remember that Star has a T in it, so all of the Ishtar names are going to have T's too, except for Al-Uzza, which kind of destroys the whole pattern. But hey, Allah first appears in Safavidic inscriptions as a specific pagan god, in the true form Allah. We don't know if he has another name in these contexts because he isn't mentioned enough. He isn't defined enough. And it's also important to note that Allah is a neutral word, technically speaking, just like Baal is. Baal just means Lord, it just means master. But it's used for a specific deity. Allah was used as a specific deity. Allah was used in a specific way for a specific deity. We can eliminate some of the gods that he appears next to as being identical with him, but we can't be for sure exactly who he is. He is appealed to in petitions to grant, I went through all of the mentions, booty from raids, relief, rain, and security. None of these are exclusive domains of Allah in these inscriptions. He is also called the Living, which is interesting. Al-Hayy, which is a name of the Islamic Allah, again, borrowing from the older pagan stuff. So I believe that the minions, because they actually have there's a specific form in which they have the name, is probably the borrowed word. This is a very late minion inscription, is probably Allah rather than Al-Ilah, and is very likely to have been borrowed from Arabic and actually picked up that name before the minions were extinct. This is a very late writing, but very likely to be actual Allah as a name. I have already mentioned that daughters of God, usually Il, are recorded first in Yemen, spread from there, and Il is connected to Allah because Il just means God, but it is a very specific God that they are the daughters of in the minds of whoever's writing this each time. Like I said, traveled north, picked up elsewhere, spread around. There's one very final point that I want to make, and that is that Muhammad originally did not say that his God's name was Allah. His God was the Lord. He was Al-Rab. He was not Allah. And in fact, Muhammad said, you do not worship or you do not serve what I serve. I do not serve what you serve. The accusation of making equals to the God did not exist in the earlier accusations. He was trying to take everyone away from their pagan God to the Lord, who is the true creator, by his own early arguments. Later on, when his uncle who protected him got really sick, he went, I have a vision. Really? Allah and the Lord are the same. They're the same God, and you can totally worship at this shrine. It's not pagan at all. And in fact, the three daughters of Allah, they're actually able to intercede for you. And then later, whenever his own followers are like, what the heck are you talking about? That's just what we've always believed. He's like, wait, that last bit about the daughters, that's not true. The real problem is that you're making equals with Allah. And so that was his new theology from that point forward. He did not originally teach that. And so this pagan god
When we get in the
became the god of
Quran
Islam.
that
Yep.
wasn't he also had a lot of the Rahman stuff, and the Muslims were eventually like, so do we worship Rahman or do we worship Allah? Who is it? Then he's like, oh well, they're the same person.
Well, during the time of the treaty, he wanted to write Allah, Al-Rahman, Al-Rahim, And the Meccans said, we don't know who this Rahman is. We don't like that. Leave it off.
Mm.
And keep in mind that his best buddy was Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr had named his oldest son in pagan
Ramen.
times Abdul Rahman,
Yeah.
servant of Rahman. And so Abu Bakr was probably a monotheist who thought he worshipped Rahman / the Lord, even though his own son was did not follow in his father's footsteps until after the conquest of Mecca. Um, Still, he turned away from Allah early on. And the
Yeah.
fact that they were like, well, we know who Allah is. That's a God we've been worshiping. We don't know who this Al-Rahman is. Don't write his name down or we won't abide by the treaty, is very telling. Allah is a pagan god. They recognized him. They had worshipped him. He was Hubal. He was syncretized to Wad, who was kind of distinct, but really the same. They blurred into each other. They were, the god of this place is definitely Allah. Allah is Wad, and Allah is Hubal. So maybe Wad and Hubal all are the same. Maybe they're still different. Yeah, it's typical pagan internal contradictions. But that's who the god of Islam became. It became this pagan god. The ancient pagan history at a pagan shrine with pagan traditions and pagan cries and pagan recitations and a pagan stone that they still fight to kiss and molest. So this is a very, very pagan religion that just got lightly smacked by a let's make it Talmudic stick. It's basically what happened. It just gets smacked with the Talmud a few times.
Or a lot of times, yeah.
Or a lot of times, yeah. So
For the El Rab, so I know that the Rab al Alamin, the Lord of the Worlds, may
sentient
derive from
beings.
Adan Ha Omin
Yeah,
for
it
the
does.
Hebrew and the rabbinic writings. That's in the Talmud a lot. It's
Yeah.
the Lord of the Worlds, or the Lord of the
Well,
Universe, Master of the
hang on.
Universe.
There is a huge difference between the meanings in Hebrew versus in Arabic. So in Hebrew, it's like of the ages, and thus of eternity, the universe, the worlds, that
Right.
kind of thing.
Yeah. Master
In
of the Universe is how it's usually translated.
in Arabic, that is not what that means. They lie to you. They lie. They are dirty liars who lie.
Okay.
What it means is alamin has the same root as knowing or knowledge. And so it means the sentient beings is what it actually means. And it is used of men and jinn, and I guess would be used of angels too, because certainly they're sentient, I would think. But explicitly, men and jinn are the alamin. It's not worlds as in everything or ages or anything like that. No, no. It is the sentient beings, usually mistranslated, because it's embarrassing because Muhammad took the sound of this word and gave it a meaning from his native language and his native understanding of it and imposed upon it that meaning. There are several places where it is extraordinarily obvious that it has to mean sentient beings, cannot mean worlds or universe or anything like that.
Which he seems to have done a lot.
Oh yeah. He borrows
Yeah.
words and then he imposes on them native Arabic meanings, and it shifts them quite a lot. Like even the word is Islam itself, Muslim, right? This
Hmm.
the root, or the Christians used a term to devote oneself to God. And that meaning was that you give yourself to God, it's devotion. The native word in Arabic means to give up all your goods and surrender after you've been conquered. So, small meaning and a literal difference, huge
Mm.
meaning and connotation. And it's the native connotation of this surrendering, giving everything up after you have been conquered that informs how it is used and how it is regarded, even though it was first used as a religious term by Christians with a very different connotation.
Mm. For Rob, do you know where the etymology of that is from?
Rob?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what the Jewish inscriptions in Arabic, that was their typical name for God in Arabic in the north. So in the
Oh,
south, it's Old South Arabian, and they call God Rahman. In the
right.
north, the Jews called him Al-Rab in Arabic, which is reasonably distantly related language within the Semitic family tree. So
Right.
they're both borrowing Jewish words. So the two words that Muhammad originally used was the word that was going to be used up in Medina, which would be al-Rab, and the word that was used to the south in Yemen, al-Rahman, by Jews.
Right. We have Muslim asking repeatedly for you to cite your sources.
I've
Uh,
cited many sources here. You can go through.
yeah, you had them on the
See,
bottom of the
le
slides a bunch of
fil,
times.
yeah, see, le fil, again, it is a war crime. When I speak French, I can read it, I cannot speak it. C'est le fil de Dieu dans l'Arabie ancienne by Christian Robin, sorry, or The Daughters of God in Ancient Arabia by Christian Robin. So that's one of the more recent ones. I've had lots of sources listed here. One of them was Minions after Ma'in, the latest presently datable Miniac text, and the god of Ma'in was another one, like many sources. The Religion of the Nabateans, a conspectus by John H. Healy. It's another source. I have quoted a bunch of I've quoted the Quran. I have quoted Ibn Ishaq. I have quoted many sources, many sources. Al-Qaldi's Al-Qaldi's Book of Idols. Stele, many different sources.
Yeah. They can go back through 'em if they're curious.
Yep.
We do have some other questions that have happened throughout the chat that I've saved.
Yes.
So one person recommended you to read a book that's in French, looks like.
No, that one looks like Spanish. And
Oh,
that one's
Spanish.
fine. I can read Spanish too. I do not commit war crimes when I speak Spanish. La
Revolución Islámica en Sanadante. La Ignacio Orogan. Orage.
That is the Islamic Revolution in the West, by the way. Oops. No, my server is overloaded at Internet Archive, but I will get it. So no, Muhammad did not speak Nabatean at all. He spoke Hijazi Arabic. The language of the Quran is Arabic. He spoke Arabic. Everything is in Arabic. It is not Nabatean Arabic, and it's certainly not Aramaic. This is something that is virtually insane, that some people are saying that, oh, it's Nabatean Aramaic. No, it is not. That's a totally different language and has not even been mentioned as a language of anything at this time. No, it's a proper Hijazi Arabic, but Hijazi, the pronunciation of Hijazi Arabic has left some marks with some funny spellings in places, in the Quran itself. So there's some funny spellings in certain places because the Hijazi dialect has some differences from other dialects of Arabic and later classical Arabic. So
Interesting.
you've
Okay,
you've
what's the
already
best
seen it
way?
on the screen. Mohammed Flex, these things were on the screen. They were all on the screen. It's not my fault if you are illiterate like your prophet. You got to actually read the things in parentheses and the references to sources and things.
So, what would you say is the best way to serve our Messiah and our God?
Well, what is God? God is love, right? And what have we been created for? We've been created to be the imagers of God. That is our God-given role. We are the imagers who make his name known on earth. And we do that through our vertical relationship with God, being a proper relationship to God and a proper relationship to one another. That's our families and our larger world. And that includes loving others. And loving does not mean making others feel good all the time, because it would make my children feel very good to get nothing but candy, but to will the good of others. So willing the
Right.
good of others includes calling them to leave their silly false pagan religion, Islam, and come to the true Lord and Savior, and
Right.
not follow the
It's
silliness.
like the idea of if you knew someone was addicted to cigarettes, the most loving thing you could do would be to tell them to stop smoking cigarettes because you know it's going to kill them. You know it's damaging their life. You know it's costing them money. It's costing them, their experience in this life, and who knows what it'll do. No, that's not related, but like the analogy to Islam is costing you in both this life and the life to come. The most loving thing we can do would be to tell you that you are following down a dangerous path that will lead to death. That is one way that we can show our love, is to helpfully help you see the problems, the errors in that thinking. And he also specifically added me after this, and it was like, what do I think? And I would say the best way we can love God is by honoring each other and submitting to His will. And His will for us is to love those who are hard to love, which is the hardest part of it, because there's many people who are very hard to love that we're still called to love. We're still called to show relationship to. We're still called to show the light of Christ to. And that is the absolute best thing we can be doing with our time in our life, is not only growing ourselves spiritually so that we are able to take on bigger burdens and responsibilities for God, but also building up actions and things that build up the kingdom to get people saved. Because that's ultimately the purpose right now in our life, is to have relationship and to lead people to Christ. That'd be my answer. Uh, we also have a Metatron speaks many languages, and Marytron is the hammer of languages.
Uh, I do
Uh,
not speak many languages. I read a lot more languages than I speak, and most of them, like, that I can just sit and read, they're all romance languages, so it's kind of cheating. So
right. So Malcolm earlier on, whenever he first joined, he posted this. I was gonna get your opinion on it before we head it
yeah,
off.
that's just a
So
lie.
this
Show me one example of Hubal serving as an intercessory figure. Show me one example from any of the literature that has Hubal acting as an intercessor. They stand in front of Hubal and say, "Oh Allah," because his title is Allah, just like Baal Hadad. You stand in front of the statue of Hadad and you say, "Oh Baal." Baal just means master, right?
Mhm.
But you have this habit among many people, but especially in this area, of distancing yourself from the proper name of the one you are honoring. Al-Uzza is not a proper name. It is a title as well. Alat is not a proper name. It is a title. Allah is not a proper name. It is a title for whom? For Hubal. So, and Dushara is the one of Shara, the Mount Seir, right? That's not a proper name either. There is this verbal distance from respect from proper names. Even Hubal would be from Baal, which is from Baal Hadad, etc., and back, right? So it's this constant distancing yourself from using a proper name out of respect. If you're calling a lot Shams, then again, you're distancing yourself again out of respect from that. Even the title a lot is too like intimate, perhaps. So yeah, you can say that, but it's a silly statement without any evidence whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, Sebastian's bringing up a bunch of things about shouldn't, like, the Surah 14:4 is incoherent because it's calling us to judge by the Gospels and the Torah, even though not all of them could speak Greek or Aramaic. So then, by the Islamic standards of you have to have a book in your own language, wouldn't that just like be silly for
Well,
Allah to?
I just did over on Reason Answers. I did an entire show on the language dilemma. I think I called it, I forgot what I called it, but basically the fact that every prophet has to come in their own language. The messenger dilemma is what I called it.
Yeah.
Right. Every prophet has to come in their own language to their own people, and then all the ways that it's broken and all the ways that it's untrue within the Islamic sources, not going outside of them.
Yeah.
So
It's a good stream. I recommend people watch it.
It's hilarious because it breaks Islam like 10 different ways just in this tiny little one declaration of Allah.
Right.
And there's so many things in Islam because he's making stuff all up as he goes along. Like, this is a religion that's made up by an ignorant dude who is just creating answers whenever he's asked questions without ever thinking it through, not in an intelligent, systematic way.
Right.
And yes, Islam has tons of denials. So Muhammad is a name. Al-Muttalib is a name. Names in Arabic all have meaning. So every Arabic name has a meaning. It is a name. That doesn't even have a title, so it does not have an article, so it cannot be a title. It is just a name. And this is something that people will say over and over again is that, oh, Muhammad's a title, Muhammad's a title, Muhammad's a title. No, Allah is a title because it has al in it. That's the determinative, right? So it's even grammatically, it's really interesting because it's treated as if it's a determinative the way you alter the sound of the vowel, like you do with al as a determinative. You do that to Allah's first syllable. But Muhammad is attested to on a pagan dude's gravestone. Like, here is Muhammad, son of so-and-so, may Atar, who is a male Venusian god, strike him down if he messes with this place. So he's a pagan dude. This is his tombstone. His name's Muhammad. There is a Christian woman with the name Muhammadah who was martyred. She's in the list of martyrs of Najran. She was an Arabic speaker because Najran was Arabic speaking. Arabic name of Muhammadah. She was slaughtered. It was just a name. Now, if you say it's odd that's Muhammad, not Muhammad, I agree. It's odd because the one who makes many praises sounds like a totally normal name. The one who's praised a ton doesn't sound so much like a name. But here's the deal. That'd be something really easy for Muhammad himself to switch around. I am called the one who makes many praises, but I am the one who receives many praises. Now all my followers must call me that. And Muhammad has a habit of renaming people both ugly things and nice
Mhm.
things. So why would he do it to himself if it just had to tweak his name a little? Because it is an existing name. It is an existing name.
Yeah. It's like Diha or Abu Bakr, those are not their actual names. They were renamed, used as names.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Abdul Muttalib is not his name, but Al Muttalib was a dude's name. Um,
Yeah.
but with Muhammad, it is a regular name. It's not even a title. It's not a nickname. It's attested as a name with all of those, with the rasam, with the
Right.
uh, consonants. But again, if you want to
Sebastian
make
pointed
the
out
difference, yeah, go ahead.
it's like Hebrew where you have like you need to have have to have the definite article in front of it. Like
Yes.
Al Mahmud or Al Muhammad would have been like, yeah, sure, that's a title. Like, for example, in Job, it says Ha Shatan or Ha Satan.
Yep.
That is not Satan. That is a person with a job title called the deceiver or the accuser. The accuser is Ha Satan or Ha Satan. Satan is the accuser. His name has a meaning of accuser. But Ha Satan in Job is likely not Satan himself. It's likely just one of the spirit beings in of like Satan's command or control. You might be able to make a case that it is actually Satan himself, but that you can't make a direct case from the Hebrew because it
Right.
is used as a title in that location. We get that a lot in the Bible.
Yep.
Uh,
And
Same thing with Muhammad.
yep. And Muhammad does not have a title, so it does not have an article. It is not the praised one, so it cannot grammatically be a title. It cannot be. And since it's used in other places of regular people, not a title. Now, again,
Yeah.
Allah is a title, but was used for one God. Just because something's a title doesn't mean that you can use it for anybody. Allah was one goddess. Allah was one God. And you'll find Muslims running around going, it can just mean the God. So it can be whatever God. No, 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 no. Allah wasn't just any old goddess. It was one specific goddess. Allah was not just any one God. Yeah, you can have syncretism because this is a pagan religion and you get that, but it's one God when they use it. They don't mean any
Mhm.
old God. They mean one God and it's a pagan God.
Right. Okay. Then the last question I had, that's the most important one, that's also one of the hardest ones to solve, is why did Muhammad do any of this?
Well, there was a crisis in his town at this time, and there had been this kind of brewing crisis for a long time about what their future would be. And short, by some accounts, 5 years or so before Muhammad suddenly decided that he was a true prophet of God, a dude named Uthman ibn Huwayrith, who was a cousin of Khadijah, who wanted them all to become Christians, almost convinced them to do it. They almost convinced him to convert. And at the last minute, he couldn't get enough support and he got kicked out of the town and he died far away. But the idea that ever since Abraham marched north past Mecca and chose not to conquer it, he didn't even know they were there. He didn't care. He was after some various fighting factions of the Kinda Kingdom that had fallen apart that he wanted to bring back under his control. But ever since then, they had realized how vulnerable they were in the middle between these powerful empires, how easily they can become crushed, and how irrelevant their paganism was becoming. With everybody, like some of the pagan tribes had to travel through territory controlled by monotheistic tribes to get to their pagan site. And when they went through, the monotheists were like, "Ha ha, you primitive pagans," that kind of thing. So they wanted position, security, a future, everything else. And Muhammad one day decided that he was totally the person who could bring this to them because he had a calling from the monotheistic God. And then over time, he got more and more fraudulent, as cult leaders do.
Yeah.
So, Modesty Hayes, name one scholar that says that Muhammad is grammatically a title. Give the name. because it's not.
As far as the Muhammad thing, I've gone back and forth on this like a dozen different times, dozen different ways of like, why in the world did he do? Why in the world did he do it? I do think you make a strong case that, and I'm leaning more towards Rodwell's interpretation of, hey, he suffered persecution, he suffered possible death for a belief that he himself would know is false. So maybe he was just delusional, maybe he thought he was actually a prophet. And then whenever he realized, because the Jews pointed out in Medina that, hey, all the things you're coming up with are false, like they're folklore. We don't what you're talking about, that's nothing. And they start arguing with him and they start denouncing him as a false prophet. He realizes, oh, maybe I am a false prophet, and then he just becomes the megalomaniac. Like you can see his shift in personality, and eventually he himself, like Surah 8, Surah 9, he's becoming Allah. At the beginning of Surah 8 and Surah 9, it's like, I and Allah command this. And it's
Yeah.
very different from the earlier Meccan surahs.
No,
Um,
I do agree with the general premise of this. I do really think that that's evident. Muhammad was going through a personal crisis at this time. The first revelation he gets is about what? About how babies are made. What's Muhammad's personal crisis? He only has daughters. He doesn't have any living sons. His wife has an unexpected geriatric pregnancy after the age of 40, and he's desperate for the son. And people have been making fun of him, like, you don't have any daughters or any sons enough sons because your one son that you had died, and you only have daughters because you're bad in bed. And he has all kinds of sexual issues that, like, Andrew Wilson isn't actually wrong with the fact that it's kind of interesting that he didn't cause damage to Aisha, and that points in certain directions, and other things about his preoccupation with sexual insufficiency points to things that are not quite right downstairs. So, and then what's his reaction to these various early things that, oh, I've been possessed, I have a demon. And he is doing these spiritual practices trying to get enlightenment. So I think he talks himself into the fact that he has the solution not only to his issues, but to his people's issues. He's preoccupied with this, concerned with this. He's been known to have fits in the past. He's does the things that are kind of spiritually to these pagans. And he talks himself into the fact that I'm a prophet, and then if he gets a little bit of resistance, people with certain personalities, they start to do something and you push back and they just double down, right? And he really convinces himself of this. I think he caught the idea that people who are cult leaders realize at a moment that they're false, and then after that they know it, is not really what happens. They like talk themselves in and out of it at varying degrees along the way. So
right.
at the beginning, he's like, I'm possessed. No, I'm a prophet. I'm a prophet. I'm definitely a prophet. Definitely a prophet for quite a while. And then he'd have these moments where he'd be like, wait, I think I might be like completely in the wrong here. But no, I'm a prophet. I'm totally a prophet. They're just lying. I'm a prophet. I'm a prophet. I'm a real prophet. Oh no, I didn't do this. And the older he got, the more the shift went from, I'm totally a prophet, to, I know I'm not, I know I'm a fraud. By the time he died, he absolutely knew he was a fraud. That's why they would not give him a paper to write on, because he could write, just not well. They would not give him a paper to write on his deathbed because they were terrified of what he was going to confess. Which is probably,
Right.
I'm a false prophet, don't follow me.
Well, he was constantly worried about the storms
Yep.
because Allah destroys with storms. So he was worried about being destroyed for being a false prophet.
And guess what I did? I had another one on that I called, was that the fear dilemma. I called that the fear dilemma. I have
Yeah,
a
at the
quick
beginning
2-hour
of the
stream on that one.
Islamophobia.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
So during Islamophobia month, awareness month, I talked about Muhammad's fear of storms and how it proves from the Quran that he believed himself to be a false prophet whenever he saw clouds in the sky by the time he got to Medina.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Jack Ray, maybe Muhammad had BPD. Uh, maybe Narcissism eventually, for sure. Um, but that's just because he gained power, and pretty much every person with power is a narcissist. Uh, it is it's it's hard. I mean, he definitely had abandonment issues because of all the stuff in his childhood. And he definitely had like father issues because he was literally the only religious leader figure ever to say, "Hey, God is not a father." That
Yeah.
seems to come out of his trauma. Um, he had some kind of messed up mental state. I don't know if you could specifically classify it as BBT or BPD. Um, yeah. Okay.
I mean, what cult leader isn't a narcissist? I wouldn't say that he had diagnosable BPD. He definitely had massive anxiety because his various suicide attempts, everything else,
Right.
and he clearly had OCD. Uh,
Right.
but I don't really see the pattern of BPD in him. Among other things, he was very charismatic, and people with borderline personality disorder can be, but the kind of just the way he talked didn't really seem that way. But yeah, OCD absolutely. Strong OCD.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're going to head probably call it here. Thank you so much for coming out, Mary. It was awesome. I appreciate all the insight into things and the sources and things to look into and the endless rabbit holes you're going to send me down from this. But thanks for coming out. I really appreciate it.
And thank you very much for having me. And yes, sometimes I am quite firm on some of the no-mo type theories as Raymond Ibrahim talks about them, but there are unhelpful things that are widely circulating, repeated, that we have to be careful about because they are not supportable historically, and they are not reputable statements. That's kind of why I started out with the don't say these couple of things, because there isn't any support for them. In fact, some of them are very, very clearly spurious. So I do urge everyone to have care in what they say. Make sure that it is feasible. Feasible. It doesn't have to be 100% provable. Like I cannot 100% prove a lot of things because there isn't. People weren't doing a lot of writing in this area at the time. The Thamudic script, as it's called, even though it has nothing to do with Thamud in the Quran, it's still called that, but has not been deciphered in a way where people are clear even what dialect is behind it because there's so little writing. But try to say things that are linguistically, historically plausible and fit into what we know of the world and its history. Oh, and I have one more question. What am I going to work with next on Islam? I am going to do the expulsion dilemma. I talked about very briefly here about the expelling of. Remember that Uthman ibn Huwayrith, who was the guy who was trying to convert everybody to Christianity, he got expelled from from Mecca, and Muhammad got this weird idea that what happened to all prophets is that their people tried to throw them out, but then if they're a true prophet, the people never succeed, and Allah comes and smites those who try to throw them out. Well, what happened to Muhammad in Mecca? He got thrown out. He
Hmm.
recontextualized it, but by his own definition, that should prove these false prophets. So I'm uh, about to talk about that on recent answers when Thaddeus gets back from ETS. So,
Yeah. You can do the same thing with a lot of things. Like he defined incest in a certain way, then he immediately did it.
yep.
With yeah. But
And like I'm just framing everything as a dilemma now because it's very easy to explain and teach on and lay out.
mm. Okay. All right. Thank you for everyone coming out, watching, interacting. Lots of good questions, lots of good material. May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you always. Thanks for watching.